Good morning, Rick.
Good morning.
I'm here in Asia, in Hong Kong, and you're in Grants Pass, Oregon, where it's morning, and I'm really looking forward to this chat. What I'd like to do is, I've read and listened to a number of your interviews, and I want to go into some greater detail on three or four subjects that I think the audience will find really interesting.
You bet.
So the one I want to start with is off-planet agriculture. And I mean, really what's triggered that is you're probably aware of the various news reports about Mars One. And there's a team of people who are planning to go to the planet Mars on a one-way journey in about 8 or 10 years' time. And I'm really concerned about what they're going to do for food. And I thought that was something we should talk about, given your background in agriculture.
Sure. I actually can give you a little more of a snippet. In 1970, when I came out of graduate school, actually it was in 1968, I went to work for the Boeing company as my first job out of graduate school. That's where I got my seat. That's where the military contacted me. And my first job was working for Art Pilgrim, who was a Lunar Base Alpha 1 project. It was later called the Space Center in Kent, but at that time it was centered in, where is it? South Park. It was the Boeing Scientific Research Laboratories, and probably they had more PhDs there than even Wilmington with DuPont and at that time. And Art Pilgrim had built this hydroponic garden, huge system. It had originally belonged to a friend of mine, Jim Dubois, and it was called New Galilee, and they were growing hydroponic tomatoes that you could poke a pin at, and I could squirt you all the way to Hong Kong. They were turgor, they were really incredible. And then we set up the hydroponic system to simulate a space system where we had clean room standards. And what we did, and this is in 1970, and actually High Times did an interview with me in February 1992, Tom Lytle, an old friend of mine, that interviewed me on Lunar Base Alpha 1 and the way that thing was growing hot on the moon. Actually, hemp was one of the 6 plants that we actually grew, and my job was to simulate the concept of light and what we would encounter in space with no shielding from, radiation and so on. And so that's where halogens were first discovered to increase the cannabinol contents in marijuana. I've got some secrets. For growing. I live in a state where it's legal. Here, that medical marijuana is legal. And but I was doing that in 1970 for the Boeing company, and we had this closed system that was like in space, where our entire system had to be, entirely self-sufficient. And so we had our floors were grading where chickens ran around and pooped into the water, and they had milkfish, tilapia, that were growing in there, and then those nutrients were then used in vermiculite to, grow plants and so on. So we had a closed system where we were using the poop going into the fish were assimilating it. That's where your mineral thing comes from. And so you can have, you wanted to talk about nutrients, what you do is you use your waste material as a closed system, just like they did in Dune, with still suits, and you take your own sweat and water and you keep it inside your body.
So what confuses me about that is, I've looked at aquaponics, and the part I get stuck on there is the aquaponic system I saw was not quite as advanced as yours. It didn't have the chickens, but they were feeding fish food to the fish, and that's where the nutrients started. And
Yeah.
out the other side were coming some pretty nutritious vegetables.
All right, well, I'm going to give you a secret that was discovered. This is extremely important secret. The thing we discovered is that if you have 1/3 chicken manure, 1/3 worm casings, and 1/3 rabbit manure, you had all your inorganic salts necessary for anything. If you do worms, chickens, and rabbits, you're good to go.
Great. So
That's how it works.
do you see that happening on Mars 1?
I'm sorry?
Do you see that happening on Mars 1?
I think we're already on Mars. I actually have evidence. When I started working for the Boeing company, I they didn't have above top secret. What they had was classified, secret, top secret, and vault permits. And the vault permits would allow me to go into certain vaults without a need to know. And that's when in 1970 I discovered 3 documents that essentially explained who I was. I have no idea, actually, I am only just today discovering who I was back then, because it doesn't work like that. You know, when you're in it and you're doing it, nobody is, going, wow, and it wasn't like that. It
But
was
I
like,
mean, you must be saying, what your place was in the big picture, right?
yeah, I was in the center of it. I was Spook Central. That's the title of a new book I will be writing about all the work that was going on around me. I was later, after Boeing closed down with the B-1, they had this big sign in Seattle, the last person out of town, please turn off the lights. In one day, when Boeing lost the B-1 contract, there were 50,000 PhDs that were unemployed in one day. And so there was no work anywhere for science. In fact, after that, science took it in the throat in terms of being credible, important, and things like that. And then the lawyers and the doctors and the strength took off. But back then, being a scientist was a rare breed, and there was no work. And that's when I met Jerry Pollock, Water. Jerry was the one that hired me when Boeing let us all off. There were 50,000 of us. I immediately picked my work back up that I was doing at Boeing, and I worked out of anesthesiology under Jerry Pollock. Jerry was not my boss; he was my lead.
Well,
And
actually, I
I
can make a
worked out
connection with Mars there because, I mean, along with food, water must be one of the really super important things there.
well, that's the deal. There's more water on Mars, literally, than there is on Earth. And Mars is a smaller planet. It's all less than 6 inches from the surface. Curiosity has confirmed what they discovered. The 3 top secret documents that I saw in 1970 described Mariner 1 in 1964 when it did a flyby Mars. It used my junior and senior year high school science fair projects as the way to actually measure water on Mars in 1964, and I did that in 1960 and 61, and then my experiments that I did, I was the first American to do it as a high school kid. I built this linear accelerator, and I had particles going faster than the speed of light. I can send you some old photos of me when I was in high school. I was this weird kid. Anyway, basically, when Mariner, what it did is it created, we called them mesons back then. It was a muon. And muons could create what's called a tachyon factory. And so you shoot these particles down at the planet, and when they slowed down in mediums like water, the index of refraction, the speed of light was slower, and so it would cause radiation to come off that was at that time called Cherenkov radiation. Today, it's related to Bremenstrahlen, but originally it was called Cherenkov radiation, and it's particles that are going faster than the speed of light in a medium, and as they're slowing down, it creates
But Rick, there's been
radiation.
a whole history, I
That's
think,
when
of,
they knew there was water on Mars.
the water debate
Second.
on Mars. I think by now, the water debate on Mars has been, is over, and everyone agrees there's water there. But Since that time of the
Oh yeah, no,
60s,
there's no. Look,
I think there must have been at least a decade or two when a lot of people were asking the question, is there any water there at all? So are you saying that sure.
Well, they already knew that in the 60s. Look, let me finish the story. In 1965, then, they detonated, no, it was 1967. 1964, they knew there was water on Mars. In 1967, they detonated a nuclear warhead on the south pole of Mars in their first and unsuccessful attempt to try to terraform it. It didn't work. But, and then in 1968, the third document I saw, there was a joint manned expedition to Mars with Russia. And this was 1 year before the moon. That's why the big, no, we never went to the moon. We did go to the moon, but it was not for scientific study as much as Mars had water. That was a possible get out of jail card for Earth. That no matter what happened to Earth, mankind would still have a chance of seeding. And so they wanted to get that out there. I have no idea what happened in 68, but 44 years later, you've got to guess that with the missing money and space funds, we've been on Mars for, probably 40 years. Probably 40 years. And I don't know how that works. I know that there's wars that go on inside the Pentagon, just like you think of wars outside of the world. The fourth floor is in war, second floor, and so there's turf battles and things of that nature, little small cells within each group that have delusions of grandeur or whatever. They all have agendas. You can't fault many of the people I worked with in terms of their intentionality. It was not about warmongering like it is today. And so I was a Roger boy, I was just a young kid, and out of graduate school with intent of trying to do the right thing. And of course, as you've noticed, there is an element of spirituality in me. I'm really, it's your intentionality is as important as what you're doing. It's not what you're doing as much as how you do it, the quality you go about it. And so there was always that element of questioning why we would do something a certain way over others. And that's one of the reasons why I left the military and went into farming as a dirt farmer. I had enough of and the direction. Nuclear energy has a lot of applications, including medicine. And but the first application, of course, is always weapons. And so that wasn't where I was coming from. And so I became a dirt farmer. And for the last 35 years, I've been out learning how to talk to the soil. And, like I did with my physics. And I've written books in agriculture. I've written books on spiritual development, like trying to, increase your level of awareness and relationship to self. Today, I've had in recent weeks, even just before I did the coast to coast, cosmic consciousness experience. Literally, just like out in the textbooks, I had an moment of enlightenment, and it was so wonderful that I now aspire
talk about the holographic universe next.
That's how you're going to change the movie. Well, agriculture, xenoagriculture. Xenoagriculture, there is an excellent movie that's on Facebook, not Facebook, Netflix, and it's called In Planet. You can find it on the internet for free. Alien Planet is a unmanned exploration of a planet in a different star system, and what they might encounter and how they would approach encountering new life forms, intelligent or not. And it was extremely well done. I would love to see a similar show on agriculture, working with a different, biosphere and rules of engagement, with Michael Razia and habitats, the concept of groups of different layers of organisms somehow working in an
Well, I
aggregate
watched a video actually
create
earlier today,
minerals in
sort
your
of in
life
preparation for this,
needed,
and it was about a team that spent 4 months in a experiment, all indoors, simulating a Martian colony, and they did grow some food. Kale was one of the things they grew. And they also, I can't remember what else they grew. They grew some sprouts, I think.
Really?
And, but they used an awful lot of
course they did. Sprouts.
freeze-dried foods.
Granola.
And, I think that's just not practical to try
Yeah,
and live off
yeah.
freeze-dried
The
foods.
thing is,
Because especially once you get to the planet, there's probably no coming back. That's the plan anyway, and they're going to need to grow their own food when they get there. They can't rely on stores coming from planet Earth. So what are they going to take with them?
I don't know that it's necessary. Your heirloom seeds, that's a good thing.
I don't know that it's necessary. Your heirloom seed, that's a good thing. Yeah, just kidding. What's going to happen is that we're going to discover other life forms there. Just like in this movie Alien Planet that has trees, but they're not trees. They're something else, but they're like trees. There'll be similar kinds of groupings in terms of the way we'll look at habitat. Realize we're only in the 21st century. Things are going to change in the 25th century. Buck Rogers. But, yeah. But, with Ming and his elixir vitae. There you go. But it's going to be a different relationship to how we would think of ourselves as indigenous. And really, one of the most closest forms of true indigenous is a 4-year-old child, even more than an Aborigine. And so I believe the colonization of planets will begin with children, the way they go into the environment and find their position
that's very interesting
in
because
their
they are planning to
respective
take
pecking order, if you will, of
free men
hierarchy.
and free women.
We're only
Those numbers seem to work pretty well. They work pretty well in the experiment they did in Hawaii. And, they now talk about children because it's inevitable there's going to be pregnancy at some point, I think. Hopefully not on the flight there, which is 6 or 8 months.
Not mentioned yet with this whole thing is the exposure.
the problem, that's not mentioned yet with this whole thing is the exposure to high-end gamma rays and no shielding. That is the primary problem with everything going into space. Mother Earth has a really nice, warm closure of protection of us as a life form down here with the atmosphere and the clouds and the moisture and all the rest of it. They're messing some of that up with engineering big time now, but basically I'm seeing the importance of having some kind of shielding. And I'm going to talk about that for 1 second. You see, when astronauts go across the Van Allen belt and into deep space, they are exposed to levels of radiation that would make Fukushima a kiss. We're talking at least
Rick, can I just interrupt
100
you? I just want to
times
slow you
above
down for a
background,
second.
not 10 times
Because
like
some
we're
people may
currently
not
enjoying.
get that. I'm
And,
not sure I get it myself
I-
entirely. But we've had a lot of people in near space orbit around Earth,
Okay.
and we've had people go to the moon. But the radiation people are finding when they're in space stations in near Earth orbit, you're saying that there's something very different when they get in deep space?
Yeah, there's no shielding. Nothing is going to stop a gamma ray coming off the sun like a coronal mass. It doesn't get absorbed.
Yeah, there's no shielding. Nothing is going to stop a gamma ray coming off the sun like a coronal mass ejection. Doesn't get absorbed by the atmosphere. Goes right through you. And so, think
So
about
I've
it.
heard the water is a pretty good
EMF
thing to stop
spike.
that.
You're getting radiated. And probably
Like lead or that nature.
some water, yeah, but you couldn't have it thick enough, like lead or something of that nature. Now, I saw a Scientific American article. It was in 2010. The article came out, and then it stopped, and I didn't see any follow-up on that. And that's what I used to do when I was a physicist. When I would see research come up, and then it would stop, I'd ask the question, "Where did it go?" Did it top secret when they buried it? Okay, what the article was about was taking a monofilament weave of copper in a geometric format that was impregnated in spandex material, and it would reflect gamma rays because of the geometry of it. I don't understand the physics, but they had a prototype of how they were moving in that direction. All the discovery on that stopped. There was no more reporting on that kind of thing. So I think what we've done now is we've developed a little still suit, kind of like the aliens when they come down here to slum in poor space, they have these little suits on or something that will somehow reflect gamma. How do you do that? I have no idea how that physics works unless the monowave geometry somehow sets up resonances so that the gamma rays somehow are reflected, trying and goes off rather than going through. Remember,
the rest of the ship.
gamma rays.
And when a cosmic ray storm is coming, they can, all gather in the pantry and get through that.
Semi-protection from that. Right now, there is no protection, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have some semi-protection from that. Right now, there is no protection, really. And that's a serious thing. And Mars, of course, the reason that you would be underground, to give you a sense of Mars for a second, if you were standing on Mars, the air is so thin, the atmosphere is so thin, that if your feet were at 70 degrees, the top of your head here, just the thinnest of the atmosphere, -5 degrees. That's how thin the air is on Mars. That's why when Total Recall guys are popping out,
a fruit tree,
difference in
the
pressure
roots are going to
at
be
the bottom,
fine, and
that kind of thing.
the fruit's going to be frozen.
On the surface of Mars, yes. That would be, we have a thing called the Mars.
Well, on the surface of Mars, yes. That would be, we have a thing called the Mars Project in Kailua, where we actually have 2 geodesic domes, one inside the other one, and they pump associates water that we have on Mars between them as a radiation shield. It will, okay, that's probably how they're going to do it. With 2 geodesic-like structures with
So the radiation problem
dome of
rays
water
doesn't stop
between
when
the
they
2
reach
of them.
Mars.
Acting
They
as
may
a
get some
radiation
protection,
shield.
but nothing like they get on the Earth.
No, and more, the gamma rays, when they're
No, that's correct. And more, that gamma rays when they're discharged off the sun, if Mars is in its direction, it's going to get faulted just like the Earth does. So and the thing is, the surface.
So you
of
see
Mars
them,
is gonna get
having greenhouses where
more
the greenhouse is in the
backer of
ground,
a radiation.
but it has an opening to the sky, and it's covered with some kind of protection to keep the heat and light in.
Yeah, that's survival school 1 in terms of the way they do greenhouses today.
Yeah,
What about the soil?
that's
I mean, it's,
survival
I
school
read everywhere about
101
the rust
in terms
and
of the way
iron
they
ore.
do
That can't be good
greenhouses
for
today
plants.
here on Earth. The radiation.
Well, it depends on what ion form it's in. It's predicated on how it's aggregated.
Well, it depends on what ion form it's in. It's predicated on how it's aggregated into the rest of the minerals and salts in the soil. And there are different forms of iron, iron oxide, iron peroxide. There's different levels of the way the mineral or elements would combine and the way they interface with smaller organisms, all the way down to viruses and bacteria. And so there's a relationship in all of this stuff in terms of transports. And that's one of the directions that chemistry is very important now in terms
What
of
about,
soil
medical?
organisms or life form and their relationship to these
you're
elements
Mr. Herb.
and how they break it down.
What, they're not going to have access to a pharmacy up there, except what they bring. What can they grow to use medicine?
You mean an herbal pharmacy?
Yeah.
On Earth, all your original
You mean an herbal pharmacy? On Earth, all your originals, so that everybody understands this, at one point, everything was extracted from herbs. All our drugs came from natural plant sources, all. And when we went to war with Germany in the First World War and the Second World War, Germany, Europe, was the primary source for those raw materials because they were considerably less than what we call storable commodities. Wheat, grains, things of that nature. And so the total volumes were considerably less. That was Martin Bauer. He was out of East Germany, and he was the primary during the period I was involved. And there were other Drogenhauses, or what we call old noble houses, that were involved with alternative agriculture or raw material sources, like I was here on Earth. I mean, in North America. I have lived that science and have a sense of things like when valerian root was the primary source for valerine sulfate, which is Valium. And of course, when Germany went to war, we had to go into our laboratory and learn how to synthesize. And that's when the big thing came out that chemistry is chemistry. It doesn't matter from a natural source or a synthesized source. If it had a certain geometry to it, structure, that it would metabolize and behave a certain way. We're now learning that that's not quite correct, just like epigenetics. There are other things going on that we don't quite understand. For example, if you had, let's say you wanted to do acetylsalicylic acid, you would go either usually to aspen leaf and aspen bark. And what you'll find in nature is that these plants have buffers that are seemingly unrelated chemistries, but somehow form an aggregate in the way your body can assimilate it, so that you're not just getting what we call the German form of standardized extract. What we're suggesting now is a thing called full spectrum, where you have a grouping of polysaccharide, beta-glucans, and that they all are important in the way they would fit together, in the way your body would assimilate and those chemistries. And so my direction has been in using natural sources as raw materials, and while they're weaker in total delivered chemistries, you just take 4 times more than, what the Mormons might suggest, in terms of their use of the verb and things. The Mormons have always been the leader in this country. Started with Dr. Shook, and then later it was Dr. Christopher. And I was there when the baton was handed from Shook to Vestier. And really, Jerry Barlow was an excommunicated Mormon up in Idaho, and was actually, in my opinion, far more knowledgeable than Christopher was in terms of the uses of these things. Where I came into the picture was with physics. I started looking at alternative agriculture in terms of physical chemistry. And that was even before Roy Teranishi with USDA started doing it. And that's what made my legal highs and some of the other drug books I wrote, keeping those, the magical and ritual herbs. What makes that book so famous was that it had signed rituals to the uses of these herbs so that they became sacraments and were kept out of the Uniform Controlled Substance Act. That's why ephedra and kola nut and guarana are now used for some of the chemistries that are in them, as opposed to using decaffeinated.
Yeah, Rick, it's just to kind of close this topic off, because I want to move on to another one. I have one last question, which you can answer as long as you like. But
Sure.
If I was the science advisor for Mars One, and I approached you and I said,
I go on and on,
Dr.
don't I?
Miller, can you tell me what half a dozen or a dozen herbs should we take to Mars? Would it be easy to give an answer on that?
I'd have to think about it because I mostly think about proper agriculture in your garden.
I'd have to think about it because I mostly think about proper agriculture in your garden back in your house. You'd start with that place and then scale it up to a different planet. But there's certain drugs each of us use. If you had a respiratory problem, you might be doing a lungwort or something that was blue. That's a blue herb. That's how they used to do it, doctrine of signatures, where you try to figure out what the herb is used for. I have, obviously, you'd want a respiratory antibiotic. You'd want the spectrum of things that you would normally use in your life so that you could approach things from your point of view. However, just being in a different habitat with gravity and all the related changes around you, we don't know today yet exactly how that's going to work on the body. We know that in space, when you're in free fall, your cells don't move quite as well, and your body starts to deteriorate. We know that in deep space, you're being exposed to gamma rays, the likes of which probably will be able to ever have children, or if you do have a third eye or something weird. Well, I mean, there's a lot of things we don't know about that. So in terms of what would I take for seed and plant and things like that, strawberry leaf is a natural aspirin. That is where they make a lot of aspirin, is from strawberry leaf. Not after the strawberries are picked.
So you might recommend taking
mulched
instead of
off.
a dozen seeds,
That leaf
maybe
is
taking
used
30 or 40 different types of seeds, and deciding later which ones you're actually going to be growing.
Yeah, and explore them, see how they work.
Right. Well, that makes a lot of sense.
And bring my freeze dry just in case it didn't work. First day out of the block, you want to have it covered from 6 ways. I think that chickens, rabbits, and worms are essential. If you have those 3 things, the likely is you will have all the inorganic salts necessary to grow anything from Earth. That I do know.
Well,
That's the
let's
things
into
we
the
did
subject.
in 1971 with our
And
children.
that's the holographic universe. And I know this is an old subject of yours and also a new one because I think you're writing a book on this topic. But maybe we can get into at least the edges of the subject. And I'm getting a hissing sound here, but what I'm gonna do actually is snap my fingers. That used to work. It's the feedback.
Hey, look
Okay.
at that! It
Well,
worked. Just like
okay,
Dorothy.
so I'd like to start with the concept. I'm going to ask you what holographic universe is. But before doing that, I'd just like to ask you if you've heard of a guy called Max Tegmark, who has a new book out called Our Mathematical Universe.
No, I haven't. I studied with Roger Penrose, who wrote the geometric universe.
No, I haven't. I studied with Roger Penrose, who wrote the geometric universe, and actually his works are prominent in my own works. He and who is it? Guy that talks with his throat. I forget from
Stephen
England.
Yeah.
He's in a wheelchair. The two of them have. Hawking. He and Hawkins have co-authored a book where they have point counterpoint, chapter to chapter, chapter to chapter, chapter to chapter, on the distinction between a black hole universe and one that is torus twisted space. And it's interesting that at the end of the book, they end up with the same universe. Now, basically, what's different than Hawking in Penrose's universe, he would suggest that space is turning on itself in microscopic levels like a universe is, and it's a torus twister space. And I used that concept when I discovered that ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is where cold fusion occurs in the body. Basically, if you look at the physics of that molecule, the physical structure of it, adenosine triphosphate, it is a quark gluon plasma. And that means that the physical structure of it pinches space into a point that creates what you would call a wormhole or whatever it is. And that, so ATP is probably what Kervon had suggested when the sodium turned into or potassium turned into sodium as a transmutations of man, the biological transmutations in man. And nobody ever knew where the cold fusion was occurring in the body, and it's ATP. And it's in our brain, it's everywhere. And it's as if, now, here's an important concept. The quark gluon plasma does not exist in this universe. It only existed in the first millisecond of the Big Bang. And since then, everything has changed, mutated out. But a quark gluon plasma is the original formation of a universe, at least in certain theories. And as such, we are creating micro universes in our body with the advent of ATP, which I will call our juice. And that means, the elixir vitae, the energy one has. You can actually eat foods that will increase the ATP content in your body, and then you can be like me. That's crazy. It's well, that's one of the things I did with it, was to
just to give us a
increase
definition of
energy.
what is a
And,
holographic universe.
Okay, the distinction between a quantum universe, which is based on
Okay, the distinction between a quantum universe, which is based on indeterminacy and entanglement, is to be distinguished differently from a holographic universe, which is based on information. And so a quantum universe is based on space-time. We try to make measurements. We have a thing called indeterminacy, which would suggest that the more we know about one thing, the less we know about something else. And
once we define it as a
so
wave
that's
particle.
space.
well, say that's what's wrong with quantum mechanics, is
Well, say that's what's wrong with quantum mechanics, is that has that entanglement, decoherence aspect, that you can't really do one or the other. It's either this or it's that, and it's seemingly going from here to there, having to do with the way you're looking at it, space-time. Now, in a holographic universe, time and space are subsets of a lesser dimension. And then you have layers of resolution in information that would be
That
your
sounds like
physical,
something from Tim Leary. Is it
emotional,
possible?
intellectual, archetypal, and so on. Up the scatter. Yes, his neurologic circuits. Yes, I use Leary because he was my teacher. It's just a model. It doesn't mean it's real. It is a way of looking at the universe that would allow certain solutions that this universe and the way we would look at it does not. In fact, one of the things they do early on is they talk about a many body problem. That means more than one electron. When we try to do Schrodinger's wave equation, the equation of motion of an electron going around a nucleus, doing whatever it's doing, being able to at any point say where it is as an equation. When we have two of them doing it, it becomes so complex, it's not solvable in our physical universe. And so what we've done in physics is invent a very simplistic space. We'll call it Hilbert space. And the problem is very simply solved here, and then we would bring it down into approximations into the physical world. And that's why when we have disagreements on measurements, then there's questions about quantum universe. Now, you'll realize a lot of science has put a lot of investment into quantum consciousness as a concept. But the problem is, in my thinking of it, space-time are not real. So why your kind of model that requires space-time when in fact the universe has to do with information? When you think with your gut, you're outside space-time. That would suggest there are parts of your physical body that literally are outside of space and time. A holographic model of the universe would suggest that if that's true, it's possible to change the movie. I originally proposed that the DNA, what a hologram is, my definition of a hologram is n dimensions of information in n minus one dimensions. It is the way information folds down or out of itself. It collapses down or comes out as more detail. Now that, right out of the gate, is going to
So I want to throw
totally
in a couple of
change
other
our
ideas I
definition
picked
of
up
what
here.
information is and what it is not.
There's a guy called Nassim Harriman, who you may know of.
I've met the same,
Yeah, so as I understand his stuff, he
I know
says
Nassim, yeah,
inside
I've
of a
met Nassim,
protein,
yeah.
he can find the mass of the whole galaxy, and in other words, everything's connected.
He's simplifying and paraphrasing, but yes, basically as a
He's simplifying and paraphrasing, but yes, basically as above, below. Good old Hermes had it right off the first. Now, if you choose to look, I have a picture of the sun doing a coronal mass ejection in 2010 that was an exact duplication of a DNA molecule. And I had to think, what does that mean in terms of structured water and the way it would impregnate the Earth? I had to realize there's something more going on here than space-time. And that a hologram, like last year's Nobel Prize on the Bose-Einstein condensate, had two particles that are at opposite ends of the universe, and that when one went this way, that went that way, and we then proved they were somehow simply connected, that while this was doing something, this reflected it somehow other.
So
Now,
I'm
in
gonna
a
try and summarize that
holographic
in my own
universe,
words.
it's the same particle with the camera.
It's about learning process.
Different resolutions of the information.
Once the universe solves a problem like how to do DNA, it can use the same solution at different levels of magnification. Is that what we're talking about?
that's a good overview. Yes, that is
That's it. That's a good one. That's perfect. That's a good overview. Yes, that is a right.
If you're talking about
that
changing
is a
the
right
movie,
statement within qualifications.
You're talking
Yes,
about bringing
yes.
new learning into this.
no, no, everything's here. Everything's at a point. What we're talking about is your awareness of it.
No, no. Everything's here. Everything's at a point. What we're talking about is your awareness of it. Okay, and that's why we make a big deal about EQ being more important than IQ. Emotional awareness. That emotions are above physical pain. So it's the same information with more detail. That is what you're cascading upward or downward in a holographic system. And so, using my definition, the DNA would be seen as a three-dimensional hologram of force space. Who you were, who you are, and who you will has an element of time to it. And so if you look at the brain is like on this big antenna, big brain, and it is a amorphous semiconductor. It's constantly changing, moving around. And so it's a four-dimensional hologram, five space. And that means why all
So
the masters
inside you
used
can
to
touch that
suggest
fourth
the
dimension
importance
of
of
time.
going internal, because that's where it all happens. It's
Fifth dimension is changing the movie.
well, you not
Fifth
only that,
dimension
you can
is
go to
changing
fifth
the movie?
dimension and change the movie. That what's that? Yeah, like five space or sliders. The idea that now you've got green hair and you're a woman.
Okay, I want to throw
You
one
know,
more idea. at
anything
this,
that you
and
could
then,
possibly imagine is
I'll let
variation
you go.
of the theme.
I mean, I'll let you continue, whichever way you want to go with it.
Yep.
The reason I brought Ted Mark's book into this,
Crazy.
and I read a very good review of it. I haven't actually read the book yet, but he talks about different types of multiverses, and can I just summarize that because I think there might be a common element here. So like level one, he says
that
is
has
a universe. Our
Sure.
universe is one of many unconnected universes,
well,
and they all obey the same physical laws. The third one, I'm skipping the second one for a reason here. In the third one, you can branch off, but once you move down a pathway onto a branch, you're stuck on that branch. So maybe you could move from one sort of law to another sort of law, but it's a one-way street. In the middle, he talks about level 2 multiverses, where they might have different laws of physics. So we might be able to jump back from one set of laws in a particular multiverse into another set of laws of physics. Does this fit in at all with the holographic concept?
Yeah, you're basically, your thought form will take
Yeah, you're basically, your thought form will take a potential, a dot, and expand it into a balloon. And your time element would be how big the balloon is for your duration, if you will, in the way you would store memory and things like that. Really, the idea is that we're constantly changing our universes. And there is some possibility that all of us are hallucinating so badly that we only ourselves exist, and that the rest, like me, is the wise old man talking to you, and a dialogue that you have externally in the physical plane has nothing to do with reality. And, you know, there's that part of it, of with the moment of death and the awakening of the soul, you know, those kinds of things all come into an aggregate. Really, a quantum universe uses string theory and specific forms of mathematics that would allow the structuring of information differently than a
So,
holographic
Rick, what
universe
happens to
that
the
would
laws
use
of
fractal
physics? I
math,
mean, we're
mental
using
blocks,
Einsteinians or
some
something
sort
beyond
of
that.
generator thing.
Okay, here's the deal. There's been no law in
Okay. Here's the deal. There's been no known law in physics that's lasted longer than 20 years. Maybe Maxwell's right-hand rule of thumb and hitchhiking out of here. However, in terms of physics, it's not about physics. It's about your mind's eye. Because once you've got it in your mind's eye and you think it works, that's what makes it work, not the law.
So you
Define
if we
the
find
theory of
there's gonna be a
everything.
better one coming along in
Good
20
luck
years.
with that. I don't see it work.
Is that because the universe is learning
Every
through
couple
us
minutes.
and therefore changing?
Well, every couple of minutes.
Is the universe
Instead of-
learning through us, our consciousness, and that of other beings, and therefore
What's that?
changing?
Well, that would imply the nature of time, that there's some sort of evolution.
Well, that to me is
Well,
what
that
time
would
is, because
imply
Well, I
the
mean, if
nature
time
of
exists,
time,
it's a
that
learning
there's some sort of
process,
evolution
because
going on.
what I know now is
And
different
that's
from what I
already
knew
the law.
last month or 10 years ago. Something happened, and that's time.
How did they put that? Now you're getting smart. Smart tool.
And it's very
How
hard
did
to
they put
unlearn
that?
things.
Now
So,
you're getting
if I go
smart.
back in time
That's smart.
and meet my grandfather, I know things he doesn't know, and that makes a kind of paradox.
Actually, I think you'd be surprised to realize that your grandfather knew what you knew.
Actually, I think you'd be surprised to realize that your
But
grandfather
I
knew
know
what
the
you
name of
knew,
his grandson, and he
just
didn't
the
know that.
level of relationship
But
to it.
I don't mean the quality of
Grandfather.
what we know, because maybe we're getting dumber rather than smarter all the time.
I gotcha.
But you know, in terms of
Well, that's Rudolf Steiner.
you know, a learning process, because I look at
Evolved.
financial markets a lot. What strikes me about financial markets is there's a learning process going on, and that's what describes the pattern of changes, the cycles. And you know, if you understand the kind of narrative in the learning process, then you have an advantage over those who don't bother to know that.
Well, you're looking at a concept called causality and chaos theory.
Yeah.
And again, that
Well, you're looking at a concept called causality and chaos theory. And again, that concept is only associated with quantum universes. And that indeterminacy and determinacy and all of that is, in a holographic universe, potential. And then it has to do with intent and the way you project that intent into the physical world. That's what shapes and structures and makes the physical world like it is. We have a collective unconscious, which is the length, girth, and width. So, of course, in the length and width of the scale of man, we'll have apocalypse, we'll have joy, we'll have, you know, there's different elements of that that are all
But if you could go back,
part
if you could go
of
back,
our
you know, 40
soup.
years and talk to
Remove
the
the
young
baby.
Dr. Rick
And
and give him
yeah.
some
When
advice,
you make-
presumably, if he had that knowledge from you,
Oh,
your age, his whole life might change.
Well, that's why you made some sort of an agreement to slow down here in fourth space where you gave up that memory.
well, that's why you made some sort of an agreement to slum down here in fourth space where you gave up that memory. And what that part is about is the rediscovery of it. 25, toward enlightenment. It isn't a goal, it's a process. And that process is where the detail in the hologram comes from. And that's why your higher self talks to you in emotional terms, not things. And why your feelings are more important and have more content richness than the physical plane does. And then there's the intellectual plane, and then the archetypal. And that's only 4 of 8, what I call Leary's neurologic circuit. The idea that each one of those molecules, like dimethyltryptamine, will talk about how God collapses down into or out of itself as a manifestation, the Rick Strassman drug. That's one of the neurotransmitters. And I don't have the answers. I am in discovery, and as discovering, I'll tell you what happened a couple of days ago. What happened was I had a moment of exalting. I went, and I was in this place, kind of like you would when you're taking on acid. Different, but lucid. But I had this high, and I tried to remember when I had felt this before. And I started picking up images in my hand of when I had graduated from high school and I had taken my cap and thrown it up into the air, and the feeling that I had, except that it was more familiar and it happened in a different lifetime. When I hit that realization, it was like a magical memory, and then
So
that
you
opened
did some
another
kind of
door where I went to a
graduation
place
into
I've
another
never encountered in my life. And that was me evolving. There you go. Another layer of the hologram. And that is what all of you want to be
So
looking for.
how do we inspire that?
That
What
place
caused this to
is
happen?
where evolution truthfully occurs. And I'm
Yeah, but
getting
I mean,
to
you can't just wish it. You have to do something more
Ah.
than that, right?
your intentionality of it. Right here. Well, yeah, it's you got to watch the talk. I have on different layers from sex and my intentionality, wanting to get laid, whatever. That place, I have a relationship to it where I in retrospect, other parts of myself that are also very important. And once you start to sort out that, you start to get into what is called the flow. And when you're in the flow, that is where you're timeless. That's when it becomes from profane into sacred done. And I use Jungian psychotherapy as a way to best describe this, but that's not right any more than my definition of a hologram to a quantum universe. It is a visualization in my mind's
So
eye
once it's
of
there,
how it
it's
works.
true. I'm gonna
Once
repeat those
that's
words.
there,
Um,
it's true.
Can you give me another level of meaning on that?
Sure. It doesn't matter how I explain how it works.
Sure.
It matters how
It doesn't matter how I explain how it works. What matters is how you think it works.
that will change from
Once you have that, you've got it.
layers.
It's not about the explanation. That'll change from day to day, definitions, metaphors, whatever. Layers of which movie did you watch? Did you see it, how it ended that way, this way, that kind of thing. But it's your mind's eye where everything
Rick,
starts.
can you
This
give
is
us
a
another? Because
very
we're coming up
important
on
concept,
60 minutes
that
now,
it
and
starts
I
from
just
the
wondered, can you
inside
give me
and
another
goes outward.
example of
It isn't.
changing the
Yeah.
movie?
Sure.
Yeah, like the
Yeah, number 8, flat irons.
the
kill it.
meditation master that attacks his student. Yeah.
No, altered states of consciousness. Oh, yeah. But altered states are a gift from God to include tweaking and paranoia. They all have a role of your ability to do things that you can't do in the physical world. And so a meditative place allows you to bring, if you will, dream time closer to consciousness, where dream time, like the Navajo and the Hopi would say, is where you create your reality. That's why a lot of more indigenous cultures place such emphasis on your dream and how it's more real than consciousness is.
Great.
That's
Rick, that's
a
really great.
metaphor for how
I'm wondering
you
now, we're
relate
coming up on
to
60
self.
minutes. Can you tell people who want to hear more about these, read more of your books, how to find you?
Well, I'm, at oak-publishing.com. If you Google my name, Richard Allen Miller,
Well, I'm, at oak-publishing.com. If you Google my name, Rick Miller, A-L-A-N, Miller.com, and you Google it, I have all of your YouTubes and all the things that I've been doing on different subjects. You are good in that you're focusing me in certain limited little areas where I give a little more detail in that area. Really, to change the movie, you have to first know who you are. That's called self-realization or self-actualize. That means watching myself now finish projects I started 40 years ago. It's wonderful to be in this place of seeing when I see an idea,
Can you
and
talk
now
about
I'm
some of those
seeing it
projects?
in completion.
Yeah.
And I have a whole bunch of them. It's you mean books I'm writing, like the power tools, the ESP book. The ESP book is something I was going to write 30 years ago. Thinking with your gut, the intuition, but I wasn't ready because I hadn't gotten to this place here of realization of how to take ESP and relate it to intuition. It's a different metaphor that, like when I chose Navy SEALs, the ones we were going to train, I didn't choose them by how strong they were, or I could build that up, with steroids, whatever, or how many bridges they could blow up. I could teach them how to make pipe bombs. What I wanted were people that were in touch with themselves, so their decision making was impeccable or verging on paranormal. That is what made a Navy SEAL the deal. And really, the Intuitive Warrior, some of these other things where they write about some of the early training I did, it started with your own relationship to self. And that's where you converge on paranormal. You can do toys, enhancements, and things like that to do it better, like learning how to breathe so that you can change your movement of Tai Chi so that Tai Chi becomes a martial art. That is how the John Buddhist is. It's a technique in breathing that creates an altered state that's different than consciousness, where you're able to function
Rick, will you
in
come back
martial
and
arts,
talk to
and
us
yet
some more
you're
about
hallucinating
psychic
because everything's
skills
down
and
in
developing
slow
those? I
motion.
want to learn how to win the lottery. And
Michael, if you want to go on topic every week, whatever you'd like to do.
yeah, I mean, when you have time, I'd like to continue this.
We can do
maybe
it every
two or
Michael,
three
if you want to
subjects
go
each
on
time
topic every week,
in
whatever
sort
you'd
of
like
depth.
to do.
And I
It'd
think
be
an
my
hour is about right. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah, the xenoagriculture, the xenoagriculture is something that's going to happen shortly. That's because Timothy Leary, he had SMILE, space migration, intelligence increase, longevity extension. And to leave orbit was the only thing we couldn't do. We've got antioxidants, we can increase your intelligence, but we couldn't leave orbit. And now we can. And so that is to leave the womb, to be able to set out as a star child, to be able to walk other worlds that are different than ours, and be able to
Walk other
understand
worlds. I
what
love that.
indigenous
And
and
I think
getting
that's a good
into
place
the
to finish
habitat
this one.
really truly
And
means.
I'm looking forward to the next one. And we'll walk some more other worlds in that one too. Thanks very much, Rick.
Thank you for this invite.
Oh.
Thank you.